The Russian President Putin has supported ceasefire negotiations, but he sought clarifications and conditions that may indicate that it's going to be difficult to enforce the ceasefire. The Russian president has thanked world leaders, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for their peace efforts. Here's our report. Russian President Vladimir Putin has publicly acknowledged his willingness to negotiate a ceasefire, thanking leaders like US President Donald Trump, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for their peace efforts. However, he has raised some key questions.
But who will give orders to cease hostilities? And what will be the price of such orders? Do you imagine almost 2,000 kilometers? Who will figure out who and when in the field of 2,000 kilometers had broken a ceasefire? And then who will blame whom in violation of this agreement? These are many of the questions that need to be analyzed carefully by both sides. That is why the idea itself is right and we absolutely support it. But there are questions we should discuss.
Prime Minister Modi emphasized that India is siding with peace, advocating for a ceasefire that addresses the root causes of the crisis. Last month in Washington, he reiterated India's firm stance on peace.
दुनिया का एक सोच रही है कि भारत न्यूट्रल है। भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है। भारत का अपना पक्ष है और भारत का पक्ष है शांति। हम पहले दिन से ही और मैंने राष्ट्रपति पुतिन को उनकी मौजूदगी में मीडिया के सामने कहा था कि ये समय युद्ध का नहीं है और मेरा एक कन्विक्शन है कि समस्याओं का समाधान युद्ध के मैदानों में नहीं निकलता है, वो टेबल पर चर्चा करके ही निकलता है।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has actively pursued peace in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, holding multiple talks with Presidents Putin and Zelensky to emphasize dialogue and negotiation over warfare. India has provided medical supplies and relief to Ukraine. It has also abstained from most UN resolutions condemning Russia, stressing dialogue and diplomacy. India has increased imports of Russian oil since the conflict began. PM Modi has met with Ukrainian President Zelensky multiple times and pushed to open the Black Sea grain corridor. India's approach balances its strategic ties with Russia and growing relations with the West. President Putin thanked PM Modi for his noble mission to resolve the conflict, highlighting the global recognition and appreciation of PM Modi's efforts. Bureau Report, DD India. And we are joined by Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director of the Vivekananda International Foundation and former Deputy National Security Advisor. Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. Now, what primary interests and objectives do the United States, India and Brazil have in peace negotiations? Because those are the countries that President Putin mentioned. And do you see a convergence?
I think we are coming close to a breakthrough. If a ceasefire happens after 3 years of war, and I think about 1 million plus casualties, if that happens, that will be a great step and it will bring down international tensions. And I think the first credit goes to President Trump, who has taken a bold step and I think also done the right thing to get both Zelensky and Putin to agree to the ceasefire, although of course the details need to be worked out. But at the same time, as President Putin said, the other world leaders, including Prime Minister Modi, they have been playing a quite role in getting the world to this situation. And President Putin has thanked Trump and of course other leaders. But if you notice, these are also the BRICS leaders.
Yes.
These countries have stood by in some way with Russia, though not necessarily supporting what Russia did, but certainly not criticizing Russia so openly and not imposing sanctions, etc. So Prime Minister Modi very early during the conflict had very clearly indicated India's stance and his personal preference that this should
Yes.
not be an era of wars and we should resolve these issues by dialogue and diplomacy. And this is exactly what Trump has said. So there is this great convergence that has
Okay.
taken place between the US and India also, which
Indeed.
is a very big thing and has brought Europe also now to
Sure.
think in a similar vein.
So, how does India's stance on peace, impact the process if it and outcomes if the negotiations involved India directly? Because we've seen that Prime Minister has made these efforts time and again, meeting both the leaders and constantly talking about peace. And we saw that recently, as you did mention as well, and we mentioned in our story about Prime Minister in the United States reiterating that point that India is on the side of peace. So India has taken a stance in a sense, saying it's not neutral. Peace is what India stands for. How does this emphasis go out?
No, I think there is now a great deal of acceptance and in the world over that this war should come to an end. It has taken too many casualties. And there are ways of handling this conflict. So I think this India standing for peace will certainly refurbish India as a major country. And it also ties up with what Prime Minister Modi has been doing in other areas. I mean, we have talked about peace and stability, dialogue, diplomacy. We talked about Vasudev Kutumbakam during our G20 presidency. We were able to get a joint statement out despite so much differences. So I think that the world needs peace at this point of time is very much demonstrated by what India has done and quite successfully.
Indeed, we do know people talk a lot about India-Russia ties and how important they are. But what's the importance of India-Ukraine ties in influencing the role of India being a reliable negotiator?
You see, India can be a reliable negotiator. There is no doubt about that. But for that, both sides have to ask for it. We need not impose ourselves. We can facilitate in this conflict. We have not really acted as a mediator coming out with our own peace plan, because we have also said that the two sides should talk directly. If that happens, that will be great, because the issues are really between Russia and Ukraine. And this is an old story. It is not a story that began today. It actually began in 2014 or even perhaps earlier.
Yes.
So the two countries actually can talk with each other, provided they come to the table. But that will take a lot of effort. And I think India's efforts and other countries' effort has been that these two countries should begin to talk. But as we go into ceasefire discussions and negotiations, a lot of other issues will come out. As your report also quoted President Putin, mentioning several points which I think will need to be discussed, like monitoring of the ceasefire, etc.
Right.
And if that some help is required in that area, a neutral party like India, between the two, I think can certainly play a role, and it will have great credentials.
Indeed, and people talk about concessions or compromises that one party would have to make. So if we talk about Russia, what kind of concessions do you think that Russia is willing to make, given those questions that President Putin asked?
Look, this is as I said, this is a old story. This has played out for several years. Before this, there was this Minsk Accords between Russia and Ukraine, and other parties were also involved, France, Germany, US, etc. That didn't work out. So there'll be many, many issues, and these are very complicated issues, and it's the best that these two parties begin to discuss these issues. And as the Russian side has told us many times, that they were very close to an agreement in Istanbul. I think it was in May or of 22 or June of 22. And when under the UK pressure and US pressure, that deal broke through. It was simply hours away from the deals. So in some sense, there are some issues on which they can agree. But since then, of course, the war has gone on and a lot of territory has exchanged hands. Now, Putin has articulated several times what he wants from these negotiations. And I think one issue which is going to be very difficult to resolve, but it needs to be tackled, which is the root cause of this problem. And the root cause of this problem is the eastward expansion of NATO. the Russian security interest, the
Right.
absence of a security architecture in Europe. And of course, now there is also the question of territories with Russia has, and also this some Russian territory, particularly in Kursk, which is
Okay.
there with Ukraine. So I think there'll be many issues, but they'll have to go step by step. The first thing is ceasefire.
Sure.
But Russia wants a long-term, durable, sustainable settlement of this issue and not a hasty ceasefire. So that will be, I think, a difficult question, but let us see how it goes.
And NATO appears to be weakened, at least that's what the NATO Secretary General seems to say, that, you know, they need to produce more weapons because they are slow, they're lagging behind Russia and China. But Trump has offered a sort of an economic solution in terms of the rare earths and the idea of Brazil and India, and you did mention BRICS. We too have a certain economic heft, isn't it, through BRICS, and the kind of solutions that could be brought to bear in terms of the global south. How do you think that that can bring in a sort of some sort of solution to work out with because of the economic advantages that can accrue?
I think it's too early for BRICS as an institution to play a role here. We are only looking for a ceasefire that too for 30 days at this particular moment. And we know that Trump has a certain view about BRICS, and that is quite critical. So I'm not very sure whether BRICS as an institution can play a role. But certainly some of these countries that he mentioned, they happen to be a member of BRICS and in individual capacity. And also the fact that Russia, Brazil, South Africa, India and China have been interacting with each other for a number of years in BRICS platform. They understand each other pretty well. So as a group, perhaps they can play a role, but not as a BRICS. This, I think, is a bit too premature at this point of time.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Arvind Gupta,
Thank
Director
you.
of VIF and former Deputy NSA. Thank you for joining us and throwing light on the subject.